Accountability is the ability to account for your role in the pain that the relationship is experiencing. When there's pain in the relationship, another way of saying that is that there's been a rupture. So it's been divided. And now we have to take accountability to help rebuild the trust and put it back together. Accountability generally is thought of, if you've ever heard somebody say, like, who's accountable for this? Or if you've ever asked your kids or your employees, you're like, who's accountable? There's an underlying essence of who's at fault. And when something or someone is at fault, then we're seeking to blame. Now, the most important thing to understand in a shift in consciousness or a shift in awareness is that accountability is a virtue, and virtue never blames, because blaming is a vice. So we've got this weird thing in our culture where we're trying to make someone else accountable. And of course, you can never make anyone else accountable. Only the person can be accountable, because it's their ability to account for what happened. So we have to remove blame. And if you've ever gone or had a rupture in your relationship, and you go to your partner and you're like talking about their behavior, and that never brings accountability. What it will do is it will bring up admittability. So if I go to you and I say, did you do this thing? Or I know that you did this thing. What I'm really hoping for is to repair the relationship. But what I'm actually doing is coming with blame, with judgment, with pain. And I'm coming at it in a very unskilled way, because I don't know what to do with my pain. But accountability never blames. And that's because we are just simply trying to account for our role in the rupture of the relationship. Now, the caveat to this is that we're also looking for the relationship to get repaired. So the big difference is thinking about, am I trying to get this person to admit, or am I trying to create a safe place so that they can account? And if you can create a safe place where they don't feel like they're going to be blamed, shamed, or judged, and judgment leads to punishment, right? Why else do we want to judge someone? The essence of judgment means to make a determination as to why or how they are wrong. That's what judging means. And when they are wrong, then how are we going to balance the scales out? Well, we're going to punish them. And so we're living in a culture that has a punitive justice system, but the punishment never actually repairs or gets what we want. In fact, if you ask people who have received judgment and said, how did that help you? It really doesn't. Now, there's other things. If they have if they've repaired things, it didn't come because of the judgment. It came from other virtues. So accountability is the ability to account for my role. And Amy and I, we would get into ruptures, right? We'd trigger each other. And she would come to me and she would say, yeah, but you did this. And one day I finally just said to her, I said, will you stop accounting for my behavior? Because you're robbing me of my ability to account for where I caused a problem, I created pain, and I need that. And I don't need you to bring it up. I need you to come and tell me where your pain is at, what it's feeling like inside of you, so that I can attune to that pain. And then I can look back and start to figure out, well, it's probably because I did this and I did this and I did that. And what we found out was that when we stopped going to the other person with our pain and talking about their behavior and what they did. We stopped robbing them of accountability. What ended up happening is that when she would come to me with her pain, I would account for far more than what she was ever thinking. I was like, this was my intention. This is what was going on. Now, some of it was really ugly and embarrassing, but it was safe enough for me to go to that depth. So the key element to accountability is to actually create an environment where there is no judgment, where there is no blaming, where there's not going to be any punishment. It's because that's why we won't be accountable. If you think about why someone is not accountable, it's because they're trying to get around punishment. But if there is no punishment, why would you ever try to get away from accountability? And so accountability has to be separated from blame or from finding fault. And if you go to the Oxford Dictionary and you look up the definition of accountability, it says the act or the ability to take or be accountable. And so it's like this, it's saying the same thing. It's like using the definition to define what the term is, and using the term to define what the definition is, right? It's the ability to be accountable. So, well, that's not actually what it is. So it's the ability to account for my role in creating the pain and the rupture in the relationship, but it's safe enough for me to account for that. So presence and safety comes from removing blame, removing fault, and letting that person be able to present the behaviors that created the pain. There's no way to be accountable unless you're willing to be vulnerable. And vulnerability means the ability to, or the willingness to be wounded. Well, if I've screwed up and I've done something that has caused a tremendous amount of pain, and you're going to punish me for it, it's going to make it really, really hard to be accountable. In fact, I venture to say it's actually impossible to be accountable. It is possible to admit it. So the way that we approach people looking for accountability, which is a critical component in the restoration of the relationship and creating safety, doesn't have anything to do with admitting. It has everything to do with being vulnerable, being willing to own my shit, and then knowing that it's not going to be weaponized, it's not going to be punished. If we can remove the weaponization and the punishment from the equation, then what we end up getting is accountability, and we get vulnerability so that the truth can come out. But you remember what A.H. Alma said, is that only when compassion is present is it safe enough for someone to see the truth. And so, a big help for you is to be able to start becoming aware of how you're approaching the relationship, and make sure that you're not seeking for admittability, but more so approaching it and saying, this is the pain that I have. This is the perception that I have. This is my pain. This is my perception. And I want to talk about this. And then that person can attune to your pain and then be able to account for their role in the pain that you're experiencing. And they'll have to be vulnerable, and they're not going to be willing to be wounded if it's going to get punished. So the way that we're approaching accountability and thinking about accountability has actually been more about admittability. And this is where we end up getting more defensive, which is ego, right? Anytime the defenses come up, is ego is now protecting us. And then we're not getting vulnerability from them. And vulnerability is the gateway to connection. And so we just have to understand that accountability is just the ability to account for my role in the rupture of the relationship that I would like to repair. And now I'm going to be vulnerable about that. And I hope that helps. If you have any questions, leave a comment in the box, and we'll see you in the next video.